Geddy Lee, celebrating the release of his new memoir, My Effin' Life.
Hello.
Geddy Lee is one of the most influential musicians of all time as the vocalist, bassist, and keyboardist and songwriter for the Rock Hall of Fame band Rush, alongside the late drummer Neil Peart and guitarist Alex Lifeson. Geddy is also the New York Times bestselling author to his list of accolades with his memoir, My Effin' Life. And today is the release day for his new docuseries on Paramount Plus. Geddy Lee asks, are bass players human too? In which our moderator, Les Claypool, is also featured in an episode. Les Claypool is an American musician, singer, songwriter, record producer, filmmaker, and author. He is the best known as the founder, lead singer, bassist, and primary songwriter of the band Primus, whose band also did a tour covering Rush's seminal album, A Farewell to Kings. So please give a warm welcome to Geddy Lee and Les Claypool for tonight's special chat. Thank you.
Hello, hello, hello.
Aloha, aloha.
Howdy, Les.
Hey, man. What do you want to talk about, brother?
I don't know. What do you want to talk about?
Let's talk some shit.
Well, let's kick things off right. Cheers, mate.
Yeah, cheerio. Look in the eyeball. Don't want bad sex.
Boing. Good to see you, man. Good to see you.
That's some fine juice. Talking shit and drinking wine.
I hope they enjoyed the show. Thank you and good night.
Yeah. So, Ged, I've been given the task of, they said moderator. So here I am with my Herb Tarlick moderation jacket, and I'm going to try and drink in moderation because I'm a professional. You see, I'm a professional.
Okay, good.
And I'm about a little over halfway through your book. That is a big bastard of a book. That's a big old son's a bitch.
Well, I'm not one to do things at half measures.
And I just got through the cocaine section. Hey. So, which is not something as in my youth I would have associated as much with Rush as maybe psychedelics and things like that. But as a autobiographarian, if that's actually a word, but I am a published author, and I was told by my publisher that I get to make up words when I want to. So, how was that doing this? What was your process to writing your autobiography, and how the hell did you remember all that stuff?
Well, those are two good questions. Well, how I got started, first of all, I really never was very interested in writing a memoir or an autobiography because much like yourself, I'm always a guy who wants to do new things. I didn't want to look backwards. And but a couple of things happened to change my mind on that. One of them, of course, was the loss of our good friend and my bandmate, Neil, shortly after 2020 happened. And so at the same time, I was sitting at home in the first pandemic lockdown. And I was also struggling with the fact that my mother was starting to lose her faculties due to dementia. So a combination of things, the sort of grief work I was trying to do to get past Neil's passing and watching her lose her memory made me start to think that maybe it's time I started writing some of these things down that I've experienced in life before I don't have the ability to do that anymore. And that sort of coincided with, my writing partner, Daniel, who Daniel Richler.
Yes.
When we both came to see you to interview you for my big book of bass, Daniel kept sending me little stories about him and his dad. His dad was the great Canadian author, Mordecai Richler, and a very revered fellow in this country, and I think across the world. And he was, to keep himself busy during the pandemic, he was writing little stories down about his memories of his dad. And he would send me one, and then he would challenge me to write something down about my dad. And so we started with this back and forth, something he called evocations. But I think he was just duping me into because he knows me, and my stories were getting longer and longer. And he finally said,
well, from what I've seen of the books so far, well, there's not a lot about your dad. You didn't get to experience a lot with your father.
no, it's true. But what he did, what he spurred in me was the idea of writing about my life. And so the stories I was writing were getting longer and longer. And he said to me finally, I think you're writing a book, and I think you should write a book. And that's when I sort of made the decision to go ahead and do that. And at the same time, I knew that I was really quite perturbed by Neil's passing, and I was having a hard time moving past that. And I thought perhaps looking at my life, looking backwards, even talking about the things that my family went through during World War II, which were stories of the Holocaust that I grew up around, and the eventual passing of my father when I was 12 years old. Maybe those were things I hadn't examined closely enough. Maybe there was some, as they say in the therapy business, maybe there was some unattended sorrow that I hadn't dealt with. Because in many ways, when you lose somebody in your life, you kind of lose everybody all over again that you've lost. It's kind of a river of grief that flows alongside your subconscious, I think. But anyway, so I started down that road. And how did I remember things? Well, it's a good question because, you know, I'm a hoarder, as you know, and I kept a lot of photographs and mementos of my years with the band and before the band. And so whenever I was stuck for a memory, I would look through my stuff and something would go, oh yeah, I remember that gig. Or look at Al, he's in his underpants here. He drank too much. Or
well, we all have those photos. Get in his underpants. That's a whole nother book.
Most certainly. I will say that for Alex's book. Anyway, so that's kind of how it happened, you know.
All right. Was it I mean, look, I've done some writing. I have not done anything, an autobiography, but I mean, it must have been a massive, massive undertaking, just as far as just devotion of time and energy and brain power and whatnot. How long did it take you to do this?
Well, it took me about 2 years really to write it all and to review it all. And my original manuscript was about 1,200 pages long.
Was this writing every day, getting up and yeah?
Yeah, you know, you've been to my home. I would get up in the morning. I would have my 2 coffees, and I would just go into my living room. I didn't feel like writing in my studio because the studio was kind of creeping me out. It had too many memories in there, and there were too many bass guitars in there. So I looked to sit in a big space that had big windows with the sunlight coming through. And we were in lockdown, so we really couldn't go anywhere anyway.
Yeah.
So I basically sat on my couch for almost 2 years writing the story. And when I'd finish a chapter, I'd send it to Daniel. He would take a little bit of the swearing out and clean up the grammar a bit and then send it back to me. And then we go back and forth like that. Before I knew it, I had 1,200 effing pages of it. So.
Well, that's another thing I noticed. There's a lot of effins in the book, like actual effins, not fucking, you know what I mean? And, you know, we've hung out quite a bit over the years, and I didn't notice you saying effing so much, but it is very Geddy. It's a very Geddy thing to say.
Yeah, well, you know, I had to kind of compromise with Daniel. He sort of encouraged me not to swear so much, and so we agreed that effing was a nice midpoint. And then I would say fucking for when I really wanted to be emphatic.
Yeah, you really needed to nail it home. All right, I like it. I do have to say that this environment that you have behind you is perfect for a guy who's talking about his life and his autobiography. You know, he's got
yeah, my library.
You look very sophisticated and learned, as they say, or you know, from Elsa Bryant they'd say learned. It's a good background for you.
Most of them are Nancy's books, so I'm bathing in her reflected knowledge, basically.
Yeah, this section over here is all your Mad magazines.
That's where my cartoon books are over there.
Yeah, I like it. All right.
My picture of the great Chris Squire is over there in the corner.
The great Chris Squire. Yeah, that kind of leads me to my next. I was surprised because you and I have we've played together recently, and you actually sat in with myself and Sean Lennon at the Delirium show a few years ago. Yeah. And one of the things you said to me is, I'm not a big jammer. I'm not big on jamming because, I said, well, we're playing Tomorrow Never Knows. It's one note, just party it up. And but in the book, it's especially the early days of Rush, a lot of jamming going on, lots of jamming, lots of playing cover tunes. You just showing up at certain gigs and just filling in as the bass player. You mentioning two of the first bass players you've mentioned, and you and I have talked about bass players over the years. I've never heard you talk about Phil Lesh or Jack Cassidy.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's true. In the early days of me learning how to play bass, I was a bit of a deadhead, and I loved.
I think there are however many Rush fans right now watching this going, what the hell? Geddy Lee was a deadhead?
Yeah, no, I loved Phil Lesh's playing, but I really loved the tone. I loved Phil Lesh's playing, but I loved his tone too. He had a really cool sound. And Jack Cassidy was really the first bass player to me, aside from John Entwistle, that wasn't afraid to use a lot of treble, and he had a pretty gnarly bass sound. And I remember seeing both the Dead and the Airplane here in Toronto way back in maybe 1970 or 71. And at the O'Keefe, what they called the O'Keefe Center here in Toronto at that time. And I just thought Cassidy ruled, and of course I learned a lot about him in more recent years and how this guy Owsley used to do all his modifications on his basses. And of course I knew the name Owsley just because there's this LSD called Purple Owsley that we used to drop when I was a kid. So I didn't realize he was also an uber bass tech and an electronic genius. I just thought he made LSD. So who knew? But well, yeah, those guys were influential to me early on.
Well, I mean, one of the things me as a bass player that you were my first bass hero. When I got my bass, I went to the Hemispheres show at the Cow Palace, and I drooled over your Rickenbacker that was sitting there on stage, and knew I didn't have any money. I wasn't gonna be able to get one, but my buddy next to me, he had one. He was bragging about it, and I wanted to hit him. But the one thing that I've always told people that you really influenced me on, besides tonality and whatnot, is the way you phrase things. You just have this. There's just a way that Geddy Lee phrases things. Boom, 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 that's very Geddy. And now that I'm hearing about the Phil Lesh thing and the Jack Cassidy, it kind of makes sense now. Because Phil especially has that kind of wandering, drifty, drift above the note and then come your way back down into it. So
yeah, absolutely.
When I heard that, I was like, pating. And it's interesting when you hear, because we're all I don't want to say victims, that's a terrible word. We're all products of the things that were cool and popular to us when we were first starting, or in our youth, whether it's clothing or music or film or whatever. And for me, it's guys like you, Chris Squire. Drummers of the time was obviously Neil and John Bonham. But to hear of the influences, your influences, and to hear of their influences, and seeing where it all kind of trickled down the hill, it's very fascinating to me. So I thought that was very interesting.
Oh, great. Well, when you're doing an interview and you're asked short questions, you can talk about your influences, but it's not comprehensive. And when you're sitting down and you're really looking back on your life, and you're thinking about every aspect of what influenced you, what didn't influence you, you have the opportunity in a book to pay homage to those people and remember correctly, which is one of the things I love about writing, because you can be more precise, and you don't have to say something and it goes out to the world and then you can't take it back again. You know, you can live with it and you can work on it and express yourself clearly and concisely. And I think that was one of the things that I found very satisfying about writing that book, is I was able to really clarify my thoughts in a lot of things, like my influences. So I'm glad.
Well, another thing is, which I'm going to get to as well, is, you know, I know how you talk about it, and I think a lot of us go through this, is, you know, you mix anxiety, the notion of looking at records and when to finally say, this is done, this is done, this is done. You know, I've mixed songs like literally 30, 40 times, you know, and from reading the book, actually listening to the book, I got a sense of you with that, with the way you worked in the studio. So did that apply to the book as well? Did you keep going back and going, are you looking at the book now going, oh shit, I wish in chapter 14 I would have said this, or wish, you know what I mean?
100%. And I'll tell you, because, you know, I was going on, I'm on this tour, this book tour, where I'm doing readings every night. And when Daniel and I were choosing excerpts to read every night, I was reviewing them with him, and I was going, why did we say that? Why didn't we say this? You know, so I'm smoothing the excerpts I'm reading. I'm kind of rewriting them as I speak them. And one thing I've really realized is that any of you young writers out there, before you send your manuscript to the publisher, read it out loud, because it's a whole different sense of what you've written. And I think you have a better way of hearing what works and what doesn't work. And so when I did the audio,
yeah, I was going to say, how was it doing the audiobook, reading your own words back to into the microphone? Did you do it from the beginning on, or did you?
No, I started at the beginning. I read the whole thing 7 hours a day for 7 days, and it was one of the hardest fucking things I've ever done in my life. I'll tell you, it was really
7 hours a day.
Yeah, and you know, I was in this vocal booth in the studio, you know, which is not a huge area.
At your house, or?
Oh no, I was at a studio downtown, and they had set up all the mics and the tone, and there was a bit of space around me, but and the director, who was really excellent, this chap named Scott Sherritt, he directed me. He wasn't there; he was in New York in his house. So you're just responding to a voice, and it feels like you're in a confessional in a way, and you're reading your life out loud, and parts of it. It's one thing to write the more emotional parts down, but it's another thing to say them out loud, because they have a different kind of impact. And I found it quite difficult. And in order to keep it sounding like I'm talking to you, not just reading to you. And so he was great. My director was great, but I found at times I was quite emotional, and other times just felt just odd to say some of these things out loud in an empty space, like I was in a vacuum or something.
Well, I found what you telling the stories, especially, you know, I was going to make a joke about your Irish Catholic upbringing, but I'm kind of leaping. I found that the stories you told of your mom and your father and your family's struggle with the, you know, obviously all that happened in Europe and the Holocaust, it seemed to just really flow out of you. There was no, you know, some of it sounded like you were reading some script, you know, like but none of that section. That was like, it was like so ingrained in you, it just flowed out of you. It was very natural and very compelling. You know, I know you say in the book, hey, if you're not into this, fast forward. I would suggest nobody fast forward. It was amazing. I really found that extraordinarily compelling.
Well, thank you. I mean, I had a lot of thoughts about why to do that in this context. And first of all, I thought, well, what is the point? What is the purpose of a memoir? You know, is it just to write a few rock and roll stories and to sell some books, or is there really? Do you owe it to the reader to share who you are for the reader to have some understanding of your personality, your real personality, to get rid of the artifice. And so for me, it was very important for the reader to understand the household I was raised in, because I think it explains my outlook on life and explains, in a sense, my value system. And so I also felt an obligation to my mom to tell her story, or to get it down on paper in an accurate, or as accurate a way as is humanly possible, 60 years after the fact, to clarify all these stories I heard as a child in my own mind, to know what happened in what year. And I wasn't really clear on her journey, and the fact that, her town became ghettoized, and then they would, work in these work camps, building the concentration camps. And that's where she met my dad. And it was the beginning of kind of a love story, which is so odd amongst the backdrop of ruin and murder and very brutal treatment. And so following her story was great for me to understand with clarity. And I also felt an obligation to leave a document of that behind for my kids, for my grandchildren and their kids. And the last thing is, because these are witnesses to a horrible thing, and these witnesses are all disappearing now. So I think it's important to restate their experience, especially in light of what we're seeing happening around the world today, all the rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Islamophobia and all this hatred. I think it was, to me, I felt my gig to restate that and to leave that behind, so people understand where these things can lead. Anyway, so those were all the reasons for it. And I'm really happy that you found it compelling. And I've heard from a lot of people that feel the same way, and they're glad I told that story. And so that makes me feel like mission accomplished in a sense.
Well, I also think the average Rush fan, and I'm complimenting myself because I was a total Rush geek as a kid. I think they tend to scratch a little deeper. They tend to look a little harder. They tend to be a little more inquisitive and a little more cerebral. So I think it was a wonderful thing to have in there. I'm sure, like everything else nowadays, there's some backlash, but I would hope it's very minimal. And this is a time when we need to remember that what humans can do to each other when the circumstances get sour.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So there you go. Well, let's see. Where am I? Let me look on my little sheet here.
Check your crib notes.
Yeah, we got kind of heavy there. I'm gonna maybe lose my flow. So let me ask you this, and there's really only one answer. Who was your favorite band that you ever toured with?
Well, of course there is only one answer, and that would be UFO. No, that of course you guys were my favorite band. Primus was my favorite. We had the most clean fun with Primus of any band.
Clean fun. We did have clean fun, which leads me to this little tidbit. Let's see how well it shows up.
Oh yeah, I love that picture.
I know you have the same picture, correct?
I do have the same picture.
Yeah.
And that picture was taped to the inside of my dressing room case for almost 30 years.
Holy moly.
And it still is. And I pulled that part of my dressing room case out, and it sits in my kitchen now, and that picture is still on it. But we were floating around San Francisco Bay, right?
Well, it was more of San Pablo Bay, but we were up near, we were near Red Rock, right next to the San Rafael Richmond Bridge. And by the way, I don't know if for posterity, Red Rock is actually for sale right now. It's the only privately owned island in San Francisco Bay that's for sale. So if you've got a hankering to build the Geddy Lee monument, you can have Red Rock.
Well, let's set the scene. So you were on tour with us, and we didn't know each other very well yet, but we were starting to get friendly. And we hit San Francisco, and there was a day off, and you asked me if I might enjoy to go out on your boat, the El Bastardo.
I said, anybody want to go fishing tomorrow? You know, me and Lur had this boat that we had fixed up. Right. And you said, I'll go, which, you know, because one of my questions coming up is about meeting heroes. And I found it, to this day, I still find it amazing because you know, I've had propositions by various fans and whatnot to go fishing with them, and I usually go, no, I'm cool. But you were just like, you were right in, you were good to go.
Yeah, I was happy to go.
And we hopped on the boat, and what happened? What's your perspective? I've told the story many times.
Okay, so my perspective is I was excited to go out fishing. I just love the idea of just being out on the bay, frankly, and hanging out with you guys, because we were having many laughs on the road together. And we threw the lines out to catch some fish. I believe I caught a very small fish, or one of us caught a very small fish. And at the end of a fun day, or towards the end, I had this restaurant reservation in San Francisco. I was meeting some friends, and we went to depart, and the engine wasn't functional. And we were kind of floating out to sea there. And I remember we asked, you were trying to get some help on the radio. And then eventually somebody was nearby, and we flagged them down. They gave us a tow into Sausalito, was it? Somewhere there. And I called a cab, and the cab met me, and then I hightailed it and left you with this disabled boat. So am I remembering that correctly?
You got a little, your glasses are a little rosier colored than mine.
Okay.
Basically, so, me and Lur were. We had only known you guys for like 5 days or a week or something, and we're zinging across. We came out of, I guess it must have been Richmond Marina. We come flying out of Richmond Marina. We're heading towards, basically over near San Quentin to sturgeon fish, and as we're just passing Red Rock, all of a sudden, bazing, the most god-awful sound you've heard, and we threw a fan belt on this 24-foot Sea Ray that me and Lur had traded my old Alfa Romeo for, and we put a new motor in it, and it had sort of through this fan belt. So, you know, I tried not to panic, because there I am in the boat with Geddy Lee, you know, my high school hero, and trying to play it as cool as possible, knowing that, you know, holy shit, we're stuck out in the middle of the bay. And me and Lur were like, I think Lur was probably like 23 or something like that, and I was probably 27 or 28. And not even knowing how to talk on the radio, I get on the radio, Mayday, Mayday, you know, which is obviously not what you want to say unless you're going down or on fire or something.
Yeah.
And I think you were videotaping the whole thing. You were very lighthearted about the whole thing, or we were kind of freaking out. But we ended up having to sit there and fish, and we caught all those sharks.
Right. That's right.
And nobody would come and help us. They would say, well, if you're not in distress, we're going to send a salvage team out, and the salvage people never came. And then finally, these guys felt pity on us and came over and towed us to the opposite side of the bay. And then you took off, and then me and Lur had to go find a fan belt. And we got the wrong size. So we came back, we had to go find another fan belt and then come back and drive back across the bay in the dark. And Lur sat up on the bow with a floodlight, freezing his ass off as we cruised across the bay to try and find our way back to Richmond. And then the next day I go to the gig, which was at the Cow Palace or Oakland Coliseum, I can't remember. And I'm walking down the hallway, and as soon as I see Alex, he's all, and he does the Gilligan's Island theme. And I was like, shit.
Yeah, your reputation had preceded you. Yeah, so I understand why you would see that quite differently, because you were freaking out, and it was your boat, so you were responsible. But I was having a hoot. I mean, I really wasn't too worried about it. And yeah, I was taking photos and all that, but it was still a blast for me. I had a good time. I was a little worried about not making my rest. But,
yeah.
It all worked
And that was
out.
back before cell phones or any of that stuff, or even GPS or any of it. But, you know, I know in the book you talk about meeting some heroes and whatnot, and sometimes, and as I know this too, sometimes you meet your heroes, and there's no saying it's sometimes it's best not to meet your heroes. But for the most part, most of my heroes, especially in the music world, have been wonderful. There's only been a couple that have been a bit of a disappointment, but it was definitely amazing to meet, for the three of us to meet our childhood heroes. And I say this all the time, and find out that you guys were just great guys. You know, we had so much fun on those tours.
We sure did, and I think the feeling was mutual. We loved you guys, and you know, we would have those weird little jams before the shows every night. And I remember the prerequisite was that you couldn't play your own instrument, and so to gain entry to these jams, and because we would hear you guys jamming from down the hall, and we wanted in on it. And I think it was really good for us to have this spirit, you know, there was this kind of freewheeling spirit about you guys. And you had a different attitude to playing the bass. And I was really drawn to that. You know, as much as that you were a fan of mine, I had a lot of respect for the way you handled that 4-string piece of furniture, as you like to call it. Because it was very different than anyone I knew. And I was telling this story a couple nights ago at one of my events that, you know, you obviously play various ways, but one of them is that you use this kind of slap thing that you do, and it's really effective. And after I saw you, I was kind of convinced to bring more funk or more rhythmic approach to my playing, but I wasn't really into the slap thing, and I couldn't get the hang of it. And I think one of the things that deterred me was the fact that my bass always had so much top end on it, that doing the slap thing with the way how low I kept my action on the instrument was making a lot more noise than music. So I kind of developed a different style of getting that funk, and that was to play it more like a flamenco instrument. And that really set me down that road. So you know, really in a lot of ways, I may have influenced you as a young man, but you also influenced me. So it was kind of a perfect circle there.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I always say the thumping and the plucking, because that's what Larry Graham called it. He's the man. He's the man. But I mean, the thing is, though, is I keep my action very low, and I have a fairly trebly tone as well, because like you, I'm just trying to sound like Chris Squire. Trying to get that Chris Squire tone all the time.
We agree.
But yeah, it's interesting because, you know, you know, pocket and groove are pocket and groove, no matter how you attack your instrument. And you have an incredible pocket and you have an incredible groove. You know, one of the grooviest players I've ever come across, and I actually told him this once, and he just kind of looked at me strange. And I use the term funk is James Hetfield from Metallica. That guy has an incredible pocket. You know, those grooves are incredible. You know, he's funky. I don't think he realizes it. And it's not the technique of your instrument. It's the feel, as you know. So.
That's right. And I know players that are great in terms of technology and understanding of the instrument, but they don't play with any feel. And I know guys that don't have music theory, don't have incredible chops, but when they start to play, their playing is compelling. And that's 100% feel. So I don't think it's something you can learn. I don't think you learn feel. I think you have, I think it's kind of innate. Guys that pick up the instrument and just draw you into whatever they play.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Sandman was one of those guys for me. I don't know if you and I think we've talked about that before. Did you know Mark Sandman? He passed away. He's the bass player for Morphine. Played a 2-string bass. The strings were tuned in unison, and he played with a slide. And it's some of the most sultry, soulful bass playing I've ever heard in my entire life. Was one of my heroes.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know his work at all.
Yeah, Morphine. You would love Morphine. They're a great band. There's an album called Yes. That's the one I would. And you like Yes?
Did they have a sax player?
Yeah, it was just 3-piece. It was Barry sax, 2-string bass, and a drummer.
Okay, so
Amazing.
I have heard Morphine. I didn't know the guy's name.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have heard that band.
So I did notice that you, obviously it took a long time for you guys to get recognized by should I say the cool people? The people that think they're cool.
The establishment?
The Rolling Stones and those types of, to me, I saw it the minute that you were on the Colbert Show, I was like, they're in the cool club finally after all these years. We've been all us, Rush nerds have been sitting around going, they're actually really badass and cool. Yeah. But as soon as he had you on that show, it was like, it was undeniable. And then along came the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and all that whatnot, But and I'm sure, like a lot of artists, I personally don't like reading press that much because it usually just annoys me. But I noticed that the pretentious thing in the book, it really struck a nerve with you about the notion of that Rush was perceived as pretentious.
Yeah. Oh, well, I was, Neil and I would talk about this. And we would talk about what the fuck does that word mean? Who's pretending here? When you're playing to your ability and you're striving for more, and you're not faking it, it's real. It's a real desire to get better. And so we didn't understand when people would call us pretentious, just because our reach perhaps exceeded our grasp. That didn't mean that it wasn't an honest effort to grab the ring. It's not like we were doing it to acquire some sort of glory. We were doing it to acquire a better handle on our music and to break down barriers to our musicianship and improve. So it always bugged us when some writer would just toss us off as some pretentious three-piece band from Canada with progressive ideals and all that stuff. And so I just thought it was interesting to review in the full spectrum of my career and where we've gone and where we came from, and try to understand why that is such an easy word to toss at a band that has high ambitions. And so that's kind of what I was getting at in the book to discuss it. And I think it's helpful to examine bad criticism, because I was as skeptical as bad reviews as I was of overly good reviews. You know what it's like. Some person waxing on about how great you are, you go, that
I don't
guy,
get good reviews. I don't know what you're talking about.
that guy didn't hear all the bad shit we played last night, So anyway, it's just interesting to try to put some perspective on it as a elder statesman looking back on his life.
Yeah. Yeah, it struck me as interesting because we all go through it. We all want to be perceived a certain way that we aren't necessarily, we're a product of what we spit out. But, the thing is Neil was a pretty intellectual guy. I mean, he wrote some pretty highbrow lyrics that, I know it was easy to discount for some people the Dungeons and Dragons sci-fi era, but that was the stuff that compelled me and all my friends. It was like being a Trekkie or something. It's like Mike Jaski, our old drummer, who's so much into Star Wars and whatnot. And the technical element of all that stuff. But also you were coming. This was during a time of pre-punk, where all of a sudden the tables were turning, and guys like John Lydon, who's a big hero to me,
Mm-hmm.
were throwing rocks at Pink Floyd and Zeppelin and Yes and these bands. So you were kind of in that era as well.
But what was interesting is that those bands legitimized us, because when the punk movement came in, I remember I think we were recording Hemispheres at the time. We were working in England when it was either Hemispheres or Farewell to Kings, when Top of the Pops had Sex Pistols, or the Clash, and all these bands were coming up. And I tell this story in the book, and we were these were bands that had incredible energy, and their bravura was admirable, but they only played 4 or 5 chords, and that was it, and they just hammered away at it. So we looked like fucking Yehudi Menuhin next to them. And in a sense, they did us a favor, even though there were always people that like rock and roll to be a pure thing and an unfused type of music. And those were the critics that really slammed us, usually were the purists, the rock and roll purists. And we were anything but purists, because we threw everything into the stew, as you guys were. And, as a lot of progressive bands did. So, but it was a great perspective in that part to be in England when, God Save the Queen was on the radio, or they were afraid to play it on the radio. And the punk movement in England was really starting. And yet then our records came out, and we sounded much more complex by virtue of the simplicity of their music.
Yeah. Do you have a high school haircut era of the band or album, or just, is there anything that leaps to your mind? As you know what I'm saying, right? We all look at our high school haircut at a certain point in time and go, oh, what the hell was I thinking? But then some time passes and you go, oh, my haircut's actually pretty cool. But do you have
our haircuts were never pretty cool.
do you have a period of Rush where you look at it and go, it's kind of cringeworthy for you?
Yeah, of course. When I look back, and I include a lot of those pictures in the book, because it's just too funny. Like when John Rutsey was our drummer, and we were kind of making our way through rising to the top of the bar circuit in Toronto, and we were kind of a glam band, we finally figured out if we played some David Bowie songs, we would get some work in clubs. And so we played Suffragette City, was one of our big numbers. And John was a real fashion plate, and eventually he started wearing glitter outfits on stage. And so Al and I got home and started putting studs in our jeans and buy sparkly tops and go on stage with a bit of eye makeup on, and we became this sort of a glam band. And when I look at those pictures today, oh my God, they just make me howl, because they're
well, I'm not even talking so much about the fashion element as musically. Do you have is there any records or song or anything where you're going, that's cringeworthy for you at this point in time?
Well, I mean, when I set about writing this book, and inspired by Neil, I'll tell you a story about Neil. So towards the end of his life, he, when he got to the point in his illness where he could no longer drive, his good friend Juan would pick him up every morning and drive him to his Bubba Cave, his fortress of solitude where he kept his cars. And on the way to the cave every day, he listened to a different Rush album. And he was doing that. He was kind of reviewing his life's work. And in the last conversation we ever had, which was, I think, in October of 2019, he made it a point. We were sitting on his balcony in Santa Monica, and he made it a point to talk about that, to talk about our music. It was just him and I. Alex was in the house talking to his wife. And he wanted to share with me how proud he was of our bass and drums work. He was proud of the songs we wrote, of course, but he was really proud of our interaction, what kind of rhythm section we became after all these years of working together. And so it was very touching to me and impactful. And it was very out of character for him to want to review. I mean, he never listened to old Rush, but when I was writing this book, I was kind of inspired by that. And I sat down, I listened to every record, and I wrote down my thoughts as I listened to the records. And of course, at one point I had intended on putting some of that in the book, and I thought, no, I don't want to do that. That's wrong. That's just wrong-headed. But it was very helpful to me in clarifying how I felt about the past, and I had very few really cringy moments. Of course, there's a song every once in a while I would go, ooh, why'd I write that? But like, Fly By Night hasn't aged very well for me, but and there are obviously parts of The Necromancer which sound a bit naive in retrospect, but there were other things that surprised me, like even on Fly By Night, like how solid the bass sound was. And I thought sometimes, you spend your whole life looking for a sound that maybe you already had, but you just don't believe it. You think there's a better version of that. And so it drives you forward, and you keep fucking around with your sound.
Can I chime in on Fly By Night? Because I read that is that, you've always been a little disappointed in Fly By Night. It's a little too vanilla, maybe is the word I'm looking for you. But that bass part to me is one of those bass parts that is very, very Geddy, doon, doon, ba-da-doon, doon, 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 doon. That's a total Geddy phrase. And that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. And the bass sound is quite good on that song too. So there are very few. I don't have regrets about anything we did musically. I would do it all again. I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change a fucking thing. I mean, I have regrets in my personal life, perhaps, and my obsession with work, and some of my dereliction of family. I feel bad about, and how much I put on my wife's shoulder to carry on, to try to have an independent life of her own at the same time, taking care of our young boy. So I do have regrets about some of that, but musically I have zero regrets.
But how many musicians do you know, or just people in general, that have had the same partner for as many years as you have, and Alex has had? My partner's sitting right across from me right now. We've been together over 30 years. It's but you don't see it very often. We're anomalies, I think. So
I think we are. I think I was talking to Chad Smith about this last night in one of our sessions, one of our book events. And, there's a lot of musicians I know are drawn to me talking about that because we can all relate to it and how difficult it is to make it work. And there are a lot of, relationship fatalities in our business. And I think it's just because of that thing I talk about where, when you've got you as a member of a band, but there's the band. The band is this, untouchable thing. It's like the monolith from 2001, A Space Odyssey, baby, I gotta go. The band needs me. The band is the excuse for everything. And sometimes you luck out and you're able to survive your difficulties with your partner. And other times it's the band that draws you away from that, and you let the rest of your life fall apart. So I think you and I are both lucky that through whatever means we were able to keep it together.
Well, I think I got the good end of the deal. She got the kind of But I mean, how much different is it than somebody who's devoted to their shoe store or their restaurant? Or, I think there's a lot of parallels you can draw between what we do and what a lot of other people do. I think it's navigating relationships. But and it wasn't like I was looking for you to throw rocks at a certain point, to back up a little bit, to throw rocks at a certain point of your career. For me, it was more like I've met a lot of Rush fans over the years, because I know I was there, Hemispheres tour, Pat Travers opening, 14-year-old kid, just, shitting myself. And because when we did the Farewell to King, the Tribute to Kings thing, I would ask people, I do the Q&As, ask people, oh, so what was your first Rush concert? And I realized I'm the old guy in the room, because very few said they saw Hemispheres. It was all, I came on at this, I came on at that. But I was surprised how many people came on later on, the records that, were much later in your career. And I found that very endearing and fascinating. So it wasn't so much I was looking for you to go, oh boy, that one record really was a pain in my ass or makes me embarrassed. It was more like reinforcing the notion that music is the soundtrack to people's lives. And what it means to them, but for what they're going through at that particular time and what they've been listening to, and like a smell, it harkens you back to that time, and hopefully it's a good time, for most people.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I do think that all my favorite bands accomplish that. I have that connection with my favorite bands. And I see that every night when I was playing, and I see it now. I see the connection that our fans have when I talk about a particular album. They come to life in the venue, and so you can see how healing or comforting or inspiring a piece of music was. And that's the magic of music, really. I mean, it really is magic.
Well, one thing I learned is I didn't realize you were such a Capra guy.
Yeah.
And I should have realized that with Cinderella Man, but Capra and Elia Kazan, those are two of my biggest heroes on the
Yeah.
I love those guys. And those films I've watched over and over. People always go, wow, because you talk about watching these old films. I was the guy on our bus that I would take over the back lounge and have Turner Classic Movies playing all the time. And up in the front lounge is where they were watching sports or Jackass or whatever. Nobody would come hang out in the back of the bus with me. I was always back there.
Same with me.
Watching these old movies.
You're just exactly describing my bus, our Rush bus.
Nobody would come back there.
Alex and Howard and Neil would be up in the front, smoking smokes, getting high, getting fucked up, laughing, and I'd be at the back watching, fucking Citizen Kane or the Magnificent Ambersons or some, or maybe a Blue Jays game replay. That's for sure. But you watch
reruns of baseball games.
The deal is this: that I would get the guys to tape the game that night and not tell me the final score, and so that I could watch it as if it didn't happen. And of course, inevitably, I'd be on the way to the bus, and they'd go, "Wow, too bad about your Jays." And it's like, fuck.
Yeah.
No point watching it now.
Well, it's interesting because I met a guy when we were touring many years ago. A guy was at one of the shows with his family, and he was like, "Hey, Les, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. I'm such and such. I wrote the lyrics to Cinderella Man." Some guy claimed he wrote the lyrics to Cinderella Man.
No,
so all the years I thought, some guy wrote the lyrics to Cinderella Man.
Oh, no,
I didn't bother to look at the liner notes, but
no, I wrote those lyrics. He was on acid. He must have.
Well, I just learned that just recently, that I was like, okay, now it makes sense. I just thought, oh, some dude, you liked his lyric, and so. But yeah, some guy years ago claimed he wrote the lyrics to Cinderella Man. He was hanging out backstage at one of your shows with his kids. So you might want to look him up, bump him in the head.
He was what we call a fabulist.
A fabulist. Okay, so I'm going, but there's some other questions here that are not from me. But what's the controversy with free will? There's some misinterpretations of free will. I've never heard about this.
No, this is just a bee in my bonnet because during the pandemic, when I posted a picture of myself in my little avatar of Instagram, and I was wearing a face covering, and a lot of people were very upset by that, especially people that live south of the Canadian border.
Where I live.
Yeah, sort of. And they would just, send me a nasty note, and they would say free will. And they would quote free will at me. And it really got me thinking about the impact of those words and what the song meant to me when I was younger, and what the song still means to me, and what it doesn't mean to me. And it made me realize that, as we get older, we say things, we believe in something in one period of our life, and we should reserve the right to correct ourselves or to evolve into a different kind of spirit. Now, of course, I still believe in free will, but I don't believe in free will at the cost of somebody else. at the cost of safety for your family or safety for your neighbor. And I've become a much more liberal person. I know that's a dirty word in America, but I have become a much more liberal thinking person. I'm very involved in things that promote community spirit. I care about my neighbor, even if I don't know my neighbor. I want to live in a healthier society. So I think what I came to the conclusion was that it's one thing to believe in free will. It's another thing to use it as an excuse to do whatever the fuck you want, no matter what the cost. And that's the point I was trying to make. Trying to make the point that terms and conditions apply when you are an adult. And it's not so easy just to say, fuck you, I'm going to do whatever I want. So that was my little soapbox speech. And that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously anything that's written anywhere, whether it's a song or a religious document, can be interpreted and manipulated however
and you know,
yeah, go ahead.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, everyone should interpret a song the way they feel, but there are some things that supersede you know, a casual interpretation.
All right. Well, let's get back to the fun stuff. I do these Q&As all the time, and people say, "What's your favorite this? What's your favorite that?" And I always go, I'm not good on favorites. I'm not good on favorites. I'm going to ask you some favorite stuff.
Okay. All right.
Can you name me 3 of your top favorite bass lines by other people?
Well, easily.
Go ahead.
A Roundabout would be right at the top. You know, Chris Squire is one of the greatest. Bass part of We Don't Get Fooled Again. I don't know if you've ever watched or listened to an isolated version of John Entwistle playing Won't Get Fooled Again, but it is just something to behold. I mean, just something to behold. And I would have to pick, you know, one of my favorite was always from the album Bless Its Pointed Little Head, Jack Cassidy. What was the song called? Come on, brain. I can hear the part, and I can't remember the title, but one of my favorite parts. I was also a big fan of the song 2120, 2120 South Michigan Avenue, Bill Wyman's bass part. When I was a kid, if you could play that, you were the shit. Great bass part.
Well, I'm glad Jack Cassidy's getting a lot of juice out of this thing, because I met Jack many years ago. He's a super nice guy, great guy, and people just don't really. I never hear him come up in these conversations, or you know, when bass players get together and chit chat. So it was. I thought it was great to hear him come up. You know.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's cool. Yeah.
And then of course Entwistle, I mean, he was so fluid the way he played. Even the way you watch him play, it was just so relaxed.
Oh my God. I mean, they were all going they were always going. All of them were always going.
But it didn't look like he was straining even the slightest bit, you know, which is that's amazing. And Roundabout Roundabout was the song. So if you could play Roundabout, you know, you go to the music store, and if you heard somebody playing Roundabout, you went around the corner to see how the hell they were doing it. You know, it was like that, and you know, Glide by Pleasure was the funk riff, if you could play that. So now, Can you name 3 of your favorite Geddy Lee riffs?
Yeah, Marathon. I love the bass part for Marathon. It's this like circular generated sort of trance. It's one of my favorite bass riffs to play. Headlong Flight is another song. I just love the bass part of that. Ironically, Free Will has a pretty darn good bass part. I was exercising my free will to be loud and obnoxious on that song.
Yeah.
So there's 3 for you.
Okay, and I was also very surprised to hear about the alopecia period of your of your life.
That's
And
true.
I was very curious, how come topical steroidal ointment was never a Rush song or album title?
Well, we did have a song called "I Think I'm Going Bald."
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, and although that was more about Alex, because as long as I've known him, was worried about going bald, and even when he had a full, curly, beautiful head of hair, he always worried that he was going to go bald, and he would talk about it incessantly. And so Neil wrote that song about his obsession with going bald. So yeah, but I did have alopecia on that very first tour, and it has returned a couple of times in my life. And it's not a pleasant experience when you're a long hair to wake up and you find you have a big bald spot somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
well, it would make a great either album or song title.
Yeah, good title.
Where is it again? I have it written down.
Topical steroidal ointment.
Yes, it rolls right off the tongue. So these days, or just by comparison, I say, so these days, what makes you get up in the morning? What you wake, and I use that as a metaphor for, like, what do you look forward to for the day? What are you up to? What's really turning your crank right now?
Well, I love my dogs. I love walking. I love birds. I love bird life, as you know. I love bird photography.
Did you saw that bird I sent you the other day?
Yes, I did.
Have you ever seen one of those?
Never.
That thing flew up. I was like, what the hell is that? It blew my mind.
Yeah, no, gorgeous. And it's funny, I was just talking to my friend and photographer, Richard Sibbel, today about the right backpack I need for my next trip. Nancy and I are planning another trip, and I have some birding trips planned on that. So I have a couple of new lenses. So I'm pretty obsessed with bird photography. And I'm not talking about the kind of bird photography where you put a tripod on your lens and you put a bunch of bird seed out and you sit there for 8 hours and wait. Of course, you're going to get a great shot if you do that. I like a guerrilla style, a guerrilla attitude to bird photography. My wife and I do hikes and walks through the woods, and I know that there are certain birds in the area, so I keep a keen ear, a keen eye out, and I try to get what I call a real capture of a special moment. And so that's exciting for me, and that gets me up in the morning. So planning those tours is really fun for me. And
dressed like a gorilla.
Now, of course, sorry?
It was, the timing's off now. It won't be funny.
Okay.
You're saying you were dressed like a gorilla when you did this? Hence the gorilla bird one. Yeah, there you go. So,
sure.
Well, I will say, so I just turned 60 very recently, and our good friends, thank you very much. Our good friends, Matt and Trey, were very, very kind and let me and my family and some friends, Laura included, go and stay in their place in Costa Rica this last week. That's where I just came back from. And I'll tell you what, you got to get Matt to let you use his place down there, because there's birds all over the place. And it's amazing.
I've been to Costa Rica in search of birds, and I have some great Costa Rican stories. I spent 2 hours trunching through the jungle one day with a bird guide trying to get a shot. Well, I wasn't a photographer then. I was just trying to see one, the famous resplendent quetzal.
The Resplendent Quetzal, another Rush album title.
And I did find one. We did find them, but it was at quite a cost. Took a long time to find, and I had to go through a lot of bogs. But anyway, so that's a real treat for me. That gets me up.
And the reason I ask that is because when we're I read in the book about. And it's so interesting because it makes me relive stuff for me is the greatest thing in a musician's career, I think, is the climb up the hill. When you're climbing up the hill, you're playing these clubs, and the next time you play a bigger place and you're playing with your heroes, and you're doing, that's it, even though you're staying in shitty hotels and you're smelling everybody's farts in the van and whatnot, it's like, still, it's like it's the greatest time, you know? And back then, that's what would get me up in the morning. That's what made me want to wake up, is to play my instrument, hang out with my bros, go see some music. And obviously you and I have talked about, you know,
and that was the same for me for many, many, many years. But it's not like that anymore for me. I love music still. I love to play, and I would like to go out and play some more. But I have cast a wider net in my life now, and there are other things I really do enjoy, and I want to follow my nose and do them.
Follow the old schnauzer.
Right.
Are you getting in the studio?
Not that I don't like talking to you, but don't we have some questions from other people we got to answer? I don't know what the thing is here.
Well, I have a sheet full of questions here from other people. Is that where we are in this?
I don't know. I don't know what the protocol is, but maybe we should give them a moment.
Okay, let's give them a moment. Their first one is from a Lou Lalonde in El Sobrante, California.
Okay.
And it asks, who had the most impressive genitalia in the band Rush?
Did that come from Lur? Lur asked that question. Alex likes to send you that question.
You tell me. No. No, that's Lou. That's old Lur. You don't have to answer.
I love it.
So, Paul Burns from Chicago, Illinois says, one of the best days of my young life was the February '81 release of Moving Pictures. I was in 7th grade and owned all of Rush vinyl records. What was the most musically challenging record for Rush to develop or record?
I would say without question, Hemispheres was the most difficult record from a sort of a technical perspective, from a performance perspective. The writing of it was not challenging. It was huge fun. And we were holed up in a house in Wales near to the Rockfield studios, and we wrote the whole record there. But by the time we went to record it, it was like, holy fuck, why did we write such a complex record? And we had a hell of a hard time getting the tracks down in one take as we wished. And then when I got to doing the vocals of that song, I'd realized we had written the whole album in a very awkward key for me to sing. And so even my normal high voice wasn't high enough, and I couldn't sing it lower. And I don't know how I did that. I think that was because when you're sketching a song out without playing it properly, you hum along and you sing along in kind of a falsetto, and you think, yeah, that'll work. That melody will work. But then by the time it was all recorded and I went into Advision Studio to record the vocals, it was like, fuck me, I can't hit those notes. And it was 2 weeks of torture for me trying to stretch my vocal cords up to make that work. So that's a very memorable one. And thank you for the question, Paul Burns from Chicago.
Was that mainly Cygnus 2, Hemispheres, or the song itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, this is from Raul Ranoa from Redlands, California. His first album, he says he bought, was 2112. I admire the commitment and deep friendship that the members of Rush shared. How did you three manage conflicts, creative, personal, business, with each other over the years? Seems like those of us who struggle to keep bands or any other type of partnership together could learn a lot from Rush's approach.
Well, thank you for that question. And I know it sounds corny because every band thinks it has a perfect sort of sense of humor, but our band's humor saved our bacon in many different ways. It was the first thing that bonded Alex and I was humor. it was the first thing that, aside from the monster sound of Neil playing his drums, it was the thing that personally connected him to us, was his ability to laugh at himself and to laugh with us. And and you must have seen that in action when we would get together and, have a few drinks. I mean, and it got us through horrible, business meetings, which we hated, and we always just poked fun at everything. And so, although we took our music very seriously, we didn't take ourselves seriously, and we loved to laugh. And especially through the very difficult times in Neil's life, where, he had some very serious challenges. 97, when he lost his daughter, Selena, and then 10 months later, he lost his wife, Jackie, and it was a horrible time. And we tried to comfort him in any way we could. And usually it was through our sense of humor, or largely at the expense of Alex, because, he's so easy to make fun of. But, and even towards the end of his life, when we would visit him, it was our job to make him laugh. And so I thank you for your question, but I really do think it was our sense of humor that stood us in good stead through all those years.
All right. Mark Friedman from Leeds, Massachusetts. I really enjoyed the audiobook version and so enjoyed your impression of your mom, which I did as well. And one of my questions until I read this one was going to be about, are you planning on doing any cartoon work in the future, voiceover stuff for
Yes, I'm available. I'm completely available for voiceover work. I would love to do a cartoon movie. Call my agent.
So this person's asking, what are some of your favorite impressions you did from the book?
Well, of course, I'm always a sucker to imitate my relatives. And when I have a chance to be an old Jewish man, it's a great pleasure for me to just slip into that. And in fact, there's one story. There's a song called Scars on one of our records. And one time when they were fucking around with my vocal sound, I did an entire version of Scars as an old Jewish man. And I have that on record somewhere. It's pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, Alex is an amazing impressionist as well, as you might expect. He does a killer Christopher Walken. And we do sometimes trade off doing accents. We would get locked into accents. I don't know if you're like that with your band, but we get locked on a tangent with an accent, and we'd be Scottish for a while, or then we'd be, Brooklynese, where you from? So that's a great way to entertain yourself on a bus ride, let me tell you. So thanks for your question.
Okay, Jody Smith from Yankton, South Dakota. The first line here, it says, "I got a chicken from your hen house!" ! What's that even mean?
Well,
some sort of code? Is there like code? What's going on here?
You remember when I replaced my dryers on stage, I designed this with the help of course, some real designers, these giant chicken roasting machines. Mm-hmm. And they had rotisseries, and they spun throughout the show. And it had a beautiful orange glow, and we called them the hen house. But I don't know how she could get a chicken from that, because they weren't real chickens.
Oh, there you go. Well, her question is, my husband and I always appreciated your dedication to your family. How did your family mitigate your heavy travel schedule over the decades?
With difficulty, and I talk about a lot of that in the book, and how, when my son was born, I was really in heat to be successful and ambitious, and I went right back on the road and left my young wife, with this child, and she had to wrestle with all those difficulties, and I would come and go, and that kind of thing kept on for quite a few years, especially in the mid 80s, early 80s, where I was really work obsessed. And And it's one of the reasons that she refused to have another child when I would suggest it, because she didn't want to be a single mom again. So we waited many years before we had another child, and I eventually convinced her. But then that was a part of the time in Rush that we would take much more time away, wouldn't work summers all the time, took long breaks so I could be around and help raise my daughter. That was in the mid 90s. She was born in 94. So thanks for the question. It's very difficult to mitigate that stuff. And now at my age now, were I to go on the road again, I would make sure I drag Nancy along with me, just like Les does with Cheney, who's sitting over there watching him.
Yeah, I don't drag her anywhere. She
likes to come.
She leads the way. She voluntarily comes along.
Well, I was inspired by that, and I asked Nancy to accompany me on this book tour, and she did pretty well, but she was wearing out after a few days.
Oh, Cheney she loves it more than I do. Well, I mean, and also, I remember many years ago sitting at your house. I mean, I'm talking many, like 30 years plus ago, sitting at your house and talking to Nancy. And when your son was, I think he was like 11 or 12 or something. And I said, well, what's it like, with Get on the road and you here with your son? And she said, when he's gone, he's gone. But when he's home, he's like super dad, because he's here all the time and he's in his life and he's doing this and he's taking him to school. And so, and obviously I've had a similar thing, because I go on the road when my kids were little, and it's probably harder on me than it was on them. They're like, dad's gone, whatever. And I'm just going in the back of the bus. I want to see my little monkeys, So,
they're more resilient than you think, but I do harbor some guilt from those days. But I'm glad to hear Nancy said that when she did.
And she said that to me because I was struggling with the notion as well,
Yeah.
Well, all right, let's move on. Move on to Joe Becht. I'm assuming it's Becht or Becht, from Anna Maria, Florida. Big fan since 1976. Rush and Geddy have been an important part of my life. Late in the evening of August 18th, 1979, my cousin and I risked life and limb sneaking out of his mom's apartment to travel on the L from Oak Park, Illinois, to Old Komsky Park in Chicago to be near the stage for the August 19th co-headlining show with Foghat.
Right.
Rush premiered early versions of Spirit of the Radio and Free Will. What can you tell us about that show, and was there a full tour that summer?
Well, you challenge my memory, sir. I would never.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I remember playing that gig, but I don't remember much about it now, all these years later. I remember seeing the field after the gig and thinking, what a horrible thing to do to a fine old ballpark like Comiskey Field. So, but I don't remember much after that and about that gig, but I appreciate the question. And there probably was a full summer tour that year, but as soon as I say that, I know there's probably 1,000 Rush fans that are going to come out and say, no, you played this date, and this date. So they know that stuff better than me.
Well, let me ask you this. Who had a bigger mustache, Neil or the drummer for Foghat?
Ooh, I think
those guys had some mustaches.
There were some serious stashes. Yeah. Neil's was more outward. I think the Foghat guy had a more this kind of Fu Manchu thing going on. Neil had the classic Three Musketeers.
Yeah, the old Three Musketeers. All right, Laura Thornton of Owensboro, Kentucky. I've been an avid fan for 42 years. When my son was studying the Holocaust in 6th or 7th grade, 2003-ish, he heard me playing Red Sector A and became very interested in the lyrics and a huge Rush fan. We were able to see you guys 5 times, a fantastic bonding experience. Rush is still #1 on his Apple playlist every year. Was your mother a fan of your music?
My mom was our biggest effing fan on the planet Earth. In fact, she could have been our agent. She thought she was our agent sometimes. Of course, when I was before she ever saw me on television, she just thought I was out of my mind and she paid no attention to our music. But once she saw that I was an entertainer, she understood, you know, look, she had something to tell her friends. He's on television. You know, that's his job. He's on television. And suddenly I was legitimized. And then when she heard us on the radio, in her store, she ran a discount variety store. It was only tuned to the classic rock station. Just on the off chance she would hear a Rush song, and she would turn it up full in the store. And so she was my biggest supporter from that point on. And yeah, I have very fond memories of my mother. And she would even call my manager up sometimes and say, "How come I'm not hearing this song on the radio? It's not on the radio enough. What are you doing? Are you doing some promotion?" You know, she would give her hell.
So, what did Ray think of that?
Ray actually, he loved my mom. And he, you know, he always was kind to her, and he always gave her credit for being so enthusiastic. So thank you for asking that question. It gives me fond memories of my mom.
Matt Riley, Austin, Texas. You were my first major influence on bass. Been playing 15 years now and still inspired. I heard the drinking age being lowered to 18 in Canada opened up a lot of gigs for you all at an important early stage. Were there any other random surprising moments or events that, looking back, had a major impact on the band's trajectory?
Wow, that's a big question. Yeah, certainly, you know, being able to play in bars, as we talked about, was huge for us because we actually could make a living. I guess the next big thing really was when WMMS in Cleveland started playing Working Man at night on their radio station, and it was only available in the States as an import, and it just sort of caught fire, and all of a sudden we got phone calls from record companies, and within a few weeks we had a record deal with Mercury Records, and that led to some changes in the band because, of course, John Rutsey was not keen on touring in the States, and we had already sort of reached a musical impasse because he didn't want to play more complicated stuff, and Alex and I did. And so we had to have auditions, and this guy walked in from St. Catharines, Ontario, named Neil Elwood Peart. And that guy was an impressive motherfucker on the drums, I have to say, pardon my French, but it was a life-changing thing because he was, you know, the circle was complete. We had our fellow traveler in the progressive vein, as they say, and everything changed from there, and it was just the most important moment, really, in our history, I think.
Mm.
Well, thank you, Matt, for that question.
All right, and then to close out, Buzz Bray, who should be an entertainer with that name, Catonsville, Maryland. When I heard 2112 for the first time, my musical journey changed forever at that moment. I became a lifelong fan from the first listen. It was what I had been waiting to hear, but didn't know it. Thank you for making such a powerful, compelling album. Two of my favorite deep tracks are Cinderella Man and Chemistry. Do you have favorite such track that was rarely played live? If so, why? Also, Bordeaux or Chateau Neuf de Pop? Thanks. I think I know the answer to that one.
Do I have a favorite? Well, you know, I used to like to play Entre Nous, and we didn't play it much early on when it came out, but then we revisited it later, and I really loved playing that song, and that was kind of a deep track. And when eventually we had an orchestra with us, or a string ensemble, shall I say, and we got to play Losing It, which was one of my favorite deep tracks that we could never play in the early days because we didn't have a violinist, and my friend Ben Mink had played such a gorgeous violin solo on it. So we could do that on the Clockwork Angels tour, which really did that song justice. So there are a few of them. But more importantly, as for Bordeaux or Chateauneuf du Pape, now let's just be real here. So I don't really enjoy Bordeaux anymore. I look at Bordeaux as a gateway drug. It's the first French wine you get into before you discover the joys of Burgundy and Pinot Noir, as my esteemed colleague would attest, being a grower of
What are you
Pinot
talking
Noir.
about? What?
Yeah, so we're both sipping his Don Quibales as we talk here today, because it's Pinot Noir, and we both love Pinot Noir. And Chateauneuf du Pape I used to really, really love, but over the years, due to commercial pressure, Chateauneuf started making bigger, bolder, heavier wines, and I lost my love of it. And there are still a couple that I will drink, but push comes to shove, give me a Burgundy anytime. And if I don't have a Burgundy at hand, of course, the first thing I reach for is Don Quibales.
Look at that plug.
Claypool Cellar. Look at that shameless plug.
Look at that shameless plug. I love it.
Claypool Cellars. Probably not allowed to show alcohol on this show, which means that we screwed the whole show. But there you have it. Thank you, Buzz Bray, for your question about wine.
And it's absolutely fun showing it on the show. We appreciate it. No.
Okay, great.
Thank you both for coming on and sharing stories. Thank you, Geddy, and thank you, Les. And thank you to everyone who came in the audience, is watching this. We really appreciate it. Our Positive Pros, the patron is really important to us and enables us to bring us programming like this. We can't do that without you all supporting the book. So please make sure you check us out online. Use the link to buy Geddy Lee's My Effin' Life. We really appreciate it. And don't forget that today is the release day for his new docuseries on Paramount Plus. Geddy Lee Asks, Our Bass Player's Human Too. Les Claypool is featured in an episode. As a bass player myself, I'm very excited to go watch it right now. So yeah, thank you again, both. Check out our website for more updated listings for what else we have to offer. So yeah, one last time, thank you, Geddy Lee, and thank you, Les.
Thank you, Leslie.
All right, man. Good
Great
seeing you.
to see you. Lovely to talk to you as always. Cheers to everyone out there. Go open a Pinot Noir.
Au reservoir, as they say.
Right.